Now it's next group of questions is different. What are the parallels with the breakdown of religions of the Native Americans by the Europeans? Pagan religions have many aspects common with Hinduism: respect for nature, construction of space and time, etc. How was India different, and why did Hinduism survive? So what he's talking about here is that European religions finished off the pagans in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe. Europe was also pagan. But Hinduism survived. And these pagan religions were very similar in some ways. Respect for nature, a lot of deities, that sort of thing, polytheistic, divine presence everywhere. So their idea of time was not linear. So these resemblances are there between the Vedic system and the pagan systems, and yet those guys finished, died, and we are still around. So he wants to know what are some of the factors. Now, the pre-Christian traditions in the Americas, in Africa, and in Europe, had in fact a lot of similarities. They had many deities. They worshipped the rivers. They worshipped the forests, mountains. They had sacred mountains. So they had those kind of things. They saw divine in various ways. They did not have Shastra. They did not have Shastra. This is very important. They had experience, which the Christians didn't have. The Christians didn't want to respect that kind of experience. It seemed to violate their particular mandate. So they call these things idolatry in a very pejorative way. This is idolatry, this is polytheism, and they banned it, they criminalized it. There was a lot of persecution of those kind of practices by the Christians. These non-Vedic pagans did not have Shastra. They did not have the Vedic Shastra, the Itihas, the grammar, the Dharma Shastras. They did not have the knowledge, the codified. They did not have the intellectual level. They had the experiential level of divinity somewhere, but they did not have the rishis who came up with the Shastras. That they did not have. So we might think of them as non-Shastra people who had similar experiences. So when they are under assault, they really don't have a counter argument. I mean, they have these great sages and experiences, but they don't have the equivalent of acharyas to talk back, to teach, to have pathshalas, to transmit the tradition from one generation to the next for thousands of years. They did not have that, and we did. So I would say that they are a subset of what the Vedic traditions offer. In fact, some of the pagan revival movements in Europe, are very interested in learning Hindu Shastras to reinterpret their own ideas, but now with the metaphysics, now with the philosophy, which they did not have. They had the experiences, but not such a deep philosophy. You will find a lot of Wicca people, that is the pagan type of people, who are reviving the Wicca traditions, are getting into goddess worship, Hindu goddess worship, because they can see that a metaphysics and a theoretical framework can be imported to explain their own framework, to give them a framework to explain their own experiences and their own deities. So they have stories, they have practices and pujas, they have all that. But now they can bring in some metaphysics and solid rigor, philosophy, and so on from the Hindu tradition. So that's an interesting question this person asked. Then the next question is, the Belgians, people from Belgium, introduced the arbitrary racial segregation in Rwanda that resulted in the Rwandan genocide. He's quoting from my book, Breaking India, because I talk about it there. Did the British do the same in India? What is the history of the caste system? In Breaking India, this book, I'm astonished that so much India has in common with the Rwandan classification system of their racial segregation. Does this imply that the caste system in India, as we know it, is only a couple of centuries old? Shankara, when asking a person to cast off his physical attributes, asks him to cast off jati, niti, kula, gotra, naam, roop, gun, dosh, etc. There is no varna there. So what is the real equivalent of caste? Does Hinduism sanction discrimination based on caste? So again, in my book I mentioned that in Rwanda, the foreign guys came and created racial, inequities and clash and conflict by classifying them as two separate people. And they did something similar in India. Lord Risley of Britain is the one who was a Darwin follower. He was a Darwinian, and he wanted to apply Darwin's idea of races and superior and inferior to human beings and classify them into categories. And so he was appointed the head of the census of India. He was in charge of the census of India. He did 4 or 5 censuses every 10 years. So he lasted for a very long time, during which period the census of India was being carried out using a system of classification that he created. So he took varnas and turned them into ethnic categories. He said there is this Brahmin caste, there is this caste, that caste, and so on. What he actually did is collapsed varna and jati into one system called caste, and that was a big mistake. That is an incorrect thing. We have jatis. We have jatis which are communities. But the community system exists everywhere. Here you have, Trump community. He's got a jati of his family, and you have got a Clinton jati and Kennedy's jatis and so on in the elite level. And you have many jatis in at all strata you have jatis. Certainly you do. In Europe you do, in France you do, England you have many jatis, many ethnic groups within society. So, but varna which is different kinds of levels of different kinds of occupations, not in a hierarchy, but different kinds of occupations, is not something that you can put all the jatis into varnas. Each jati has its priests. If you go to poor jatis in India, even today, ask them, what is your deity? They will tell you there's a goddess. They'll have a name, local name for a goddess. Then you say, okay, if there's a goddess temple, there must be a priest. They will say yes. So even the poorest jati got a priest class. They got a priest occupation. They've got people who are the kshatriyas who will defend. They've got the people in commerce who will go and do the money type of matters. I found out in Nagapattinam village, when the tsunami happened, and Swami Dayanand Saraswati has a Chatralaya that we were sponsoring. So I spent a lot of time there doing a documentary on what was happening there. And I interviewed a lot of people about their culture. And I found out that the men and women had different roles. The women had the money. The men would go catch the fish and whatnot, bring it back. So they would do the manual work of various kinds in that society. And the women would then go do the marketing, keep the money, control the finances. So if you are thinking of varna like Vaishya is a business kind of thing, in their case it was women who were the Vaishyas. They were providing the Vaishya work. The men were largely doing, according to what the classification would say, Shudra work. They were doing the manual work. And the women were turning that into monetary assets. So every jati has all the varnas. They have all the varnas. So varna is not a separate race or ethnicity. It is not that. It is not by birth. It is by merit. You could be somebody born into a family of a certain varna, and then you fall down to a different level because you haven't lived up to that expectation. You haven't lived up to the standard of quality which is expected. Or you could be born in a very poor, humble varna, and you could evolve to a much higher. And we have many such examples, many such examples. So we should not think that varna is a caste, which is a permanent lineage. People born are always going to be in that particular state. A lot of people who today call themselves Brahmins are not Brahmins because they're violating the regulations for Brahmins. They have wealth, they have personal wealth, which Brahmin is not supposed to have, and so on. They are into politics, which is for Kshatriyas. So I think we need to completely dismantle the notion that caste system as currently known today is something sanctioned by Hindu Shastras. Because Hindu Shastras talk about Varna and they talk about Jati. The word caste is not even a Sanskrit word. It's a foreign word brought in by Portuguese. The word casta is the Portuguese word. So this concept of a caste system problem and all that being always blamed on Hinduism is not accurate. Okay. So then I'll go on to the next one is, do religions change with time? After all, we have new statement from the Pope on environment, slavery, etc. Fatwas are routinely passed, meaning that religions keep changing because they're passing new regulations. Pope is passing new regulations. Fatwas are passing new regulations. So the question is, does Hinduism not change with time? In the book Indra's Net, you argue that the whole Neo-Hinduism thesis is false. There is an integral unity and social consciousness that far predates Vivekananda. So is Hinduism immune to change? I think that he's got a little misunderstanding about what the book says. In Indra's Net, there is a eternal net, open architecture, unified, but the elements within it are always evolving. It's like the internet, you can say, is permanent, but the content in it is changing. New sites are coming, old sites are going away, and the content is changing every second. So it is changing, but there's an architecture of the internet which is pretty robust. The architecture, the basic protocols, the basic systems are an open architecture, and they have a very long-term life. But within that, the actual substance and content keeps changing. So I have drawn that analogy. The Indra's Net is an open architecture, which is an eternal architecture. But within that, the particular beliefs, the particular ideas, the particular customs, the symbols keep evolving on a very rapid pace. So there is no contradiction between being Sanatana, which is eternal, and having change. In fact, I say the Shrutis are eternal, Sanatana, and the Smritis are going on changing. You can create new rules, new customs, new traditions, depending on your society. So we actually have both. It's not a conflict between permanence and change.